Okay, so a lot of the data and information I'm going to be sharing today is coming out of stuff that I've directly written about in the last couple of months. You can find pretty much all of it at euanthomson.substack.com. I've got that link there, and I'll put it up at the end of this as well. So without further ado, I'll get right into this. Okay. So the big question here is kind of for me, like, why am I here? And to me, it's becoming increasingly obvious that we cannot fight this drug poisoning crisis through a yes and approach. This really, whether we like it or not, is a political struggle. There are people benefiting from the crisis even as it worsens, which means that evidence is really only going to get us so far. So to save our friends and family who use drugs, we really need to identify who is working against change and isolate those people from our systems. Where we left off in that February presentation that a lot of you might have seen either from attending the event on February 16th at Metro Cinema in Edmonton, or just by watching the the resources that they had posted there ahead of this event. Like I had kind of just produced a little bit of a model around like what the actual Alberta model is really about. And so to me, like when I put all these dots together, it's really about reinforcing that all drug use is addiction, that drug use is a main driver of houselessness. They require criminalization of unhoused people to make this all work. They require deregulation of addiction services, really with no oversight or evaluation being made public. The whole system relies on surveillance, coercion, and control, and it's actually supported by financiers, unsurprisingly. And all of it comes together to widen this, what I would call a sales funnel from a business perspective, to load more and more people in with each passing year and extract more wealth from them. So just to summarize those three words, surveillance, coercion, and control is really what the Alberta model relies on. So surveillance could best be characterized by the way that they collect personal health numbers at Alberta supervised consumption sites, or at least have threatened to multiple occasions and legislated for it. That you can see why that matters. You see a public statement by somebody like Marshall Smith, the Premier's chief of staff, talking about going in and accessing people's AHS records and figuring out kind of like, okay, how are we going to move people around from the supervised consumption site and funnel them into treatment? Using coercive measures. So this is Chief McPhee, yet another one of his announcements around how police are going to be sort of offering addiction treatment in jails. But as we know, an offer from a police officer can often be one that you can't refuse. And then finally, control, best characterized by the way that Ophelia Black and many other hydromorphone prescription recipients have been really oppressed by the Narcotics Transition Services program that Kate's going to get into a little bit more here. And Ophelia, fortunately won that court injunction, but she's the only one in the province right now that has, protection set up between her and the UCP government that's, in my opinion, trying to kill her. So is the Alberta model working? It's not hard to see that year by year, the Alberta and BC trends are almost identical. It doesn't matter which year you're looking at, just kind of the rise and fall every year, which tells us that there's something much bigger going on than policy intervention. So no, the Alberta model is not working. It's matching BC in lockstep as it has for the last 6-7 years of this crisis. But why is that? It's because the Alberta model is the BC model. Both provinces center abstinence and prohibition. In fact, BC has more treatment beds than Alberta, a fact that I don't think Alberta is all that keen to have out in the public domain. So this is a figure that I threw up at the end of that presentation in Edmonton in February, and I'm going to expand on it a little bit. So yeah, in my opinion, again, this Alberta model is a grift. We've got people being loaded into this funnel, their wealth being extracted from them through it. But there's more to it. Some people get out of this and survive it, and then are funneled back into the system because it's really the only thing on offer for them. Safe supply is not on the table. Regulated options, just living their lives quietly, using drugs and getting on with their employment and everything else, also not on the table. Employers frequently force people into addiction treatment. And then even the dead are part of this equation. The dead are weaponized as a way to funnel more public funding into this whole system. You'll see that every time there's an announcement made about, oh, like another 130 people died last month. So we're beefing up addiction treatment services. So that's what I mean by the dead being weaponized. All this extra funding being allocated as a result of the statistics that are coming out of a system that is really set up to reinforce itself. I gotta just move my stuff here, see what I'm actually trying to say here. So what's happened since mid-February? A lot, as it turns out. So this Alberta Recovery Conference was a centerpiece of what I was talking about in that presentation from February. And since then, I've written a ton about it. Other people have written a ton about it, about all these things that are going on that are related really to what was going on inside the building of the Alberta Recovery Conference on February 21st, 22nd. So I'll go through a few. Let's see here. So we got Minister Milliken and Chief Dale McPhee highlighted from the conference, keynote people. And they've continued making overtures towards forcing abstinence on unhoused people. It's no longer just dog whistling. We can't call it that anymore. This is all being said out loud. They are going to be forcing people into addiction treatment, whether the public agrees to it or not. Academics are continually being weaponized to advance these sorts of agendas. So we've got Dr. Keith Humphreys down at Stanford. He's a longtime friend of the UCP, and he's recently commissioned a report out of his network down at Stanford to really start to try and create propaganda around the differences between Alberta and BC, and how BC is going all in on harm reduction. It's absolutely not, while Alberta's pursuing this treatment model. Both provinces, I have to emphasize again, are taking really the same fundamental approach towards the drug poisoning crisis, which is centered on abstinence. Dr. Julian Summers, likewise, kind of hard to tell these two apart sometimes, but he's at Simon Fraser University. He's got a really interesting story going right now that Press Progress has been following. I encourage you to look that up, around the way that he's treating students in his courses and the way that he's forcing ideology into the classroom. So of course there was the protest itself that we had outside of the Alberta Recovery Conference. This really represents a watershed moment, I think, for the movement here in Alberta, where we're starting to identify and acknowledge and address the people that are holding us back. And they were all inside that building at the conference. So we stood outside in -30. Some of you even came down, Evan and a couple of the other folks from your group there came down from Edmonton and joined us. It was a small group of us, 20 or 30 people, just making as much noise as we could, just to highlight the fact that the Alberta Recovery Conference really is a hub for a lot of the bad policy measures that are out there killing people right now. One of the other things I followed up with on this was just the way that the Alberta Recovery Conference appears to be very tightly linked with the far right. So we've got people like Aaron Gunn showing up to these things. We've got operatives from down in the States, and they're linked to people like Marshall Smith and Giuseppe Ganci, who's Director of Community Development at Last Door Recovery. I didn't bother highlighting the two in the bottom right there, David Pavlis and Jared Nelson, but they're also affiliated with Last Door Recovery. And like, as somebody that shows up to like drag defense events and stuff like that, like the same people were showing up to counter protest us outside of the Alberta Recovery Conference, that will show up and sort of Bible thump outside of the drag events. So it's a bit scary, but it's also validating, that we're kind of on the right track with all of this, tying these things together. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight Dr. Nathaniel Day, your head of the opioid dependency program in Alberta, who was one of the expert witnesses for the province in their defense against Ophelia Black's court injunction, where she was trying to maintain her access to a hydromorphone prescription. And his testimony included something that said these words exactly here, where Avnish Nanda, the lawyer, asked him, "So you can't force treatment, is that fair?" Dr. Day responded, "I don't know that I would fully agree with that. I don't know that I can force treatment, but there are all kinds of things that can compel a person to treatment." To me, coming from the person that's the head of the ODP, that's terrifying. And so I'm going to spend the next little bit just going into the way that the Alberta Recovery Conference, Take Back Alberta, and the far right are all kind of connected together. Again, Press Progress is going to be your best resource on the ways that these things are linked together. They've done phenomenal work all the way back, I'm sure even back beyond October, but it's been really picking up through Rumnik's work and through Stephen Maguziak here in Alberta, her counterpart for Alberta. That movie, Vancouver is Dying, went viral in Canada. They claim that like 2 million people watched it or something like that. It was run by this guy on the right in that shot you can see here. That's Aaron Gunn. He showed up at the Alberta Recovery Conference. On the left there is Marshall Smith, and they're just interviewing a guy down on the street in Vancouver. This was then kind of taken and like truncated into this Polyev film, 5-minute kind of feature thing, also featuring Marshall Smith, sorry. That they kind of dubbed like Canada is Broken. It was filmed in front of an encampment here down in Crab Park in Vancouver. And this whole thing, like, do you ever feel like everything's broken in Canada? And then basically just going on to blame like everybody who uses drugs and everybody who's unhoused. And then like all of this is really connected together with these right-wing groups like Pacific Prosperity Network. And I'll get into how that is in a sec. I just wanted to take a sec to just like analyze this photo right here from Alberta Recovery Conference in 2022. So this is for about a year old now. And all these folks gathered at this table are really kind of helping us tie together some of these loose ends. So you've got Marshall Smith, the Premier's current Chief of Staff. You've got Nathaniel Day there, who I've talked about before. You've got author and grifter Michael Schellenberger from down in the States. He funds an awful lot of activity. We can get into like how that really plays out. If we like later, we got Minister of Public Safety, Mike Ellis. You've got Keith Humphreys there we talked about. You've got Tom Wolfe. He's kind of appears to be on Schellenberger's payroll. You've got Eric Engler, so Mental Health and Addictions Chief of Staff right now. And then Rob Tanguay, a perennial UCP committee member, and as well as the Newly Institute co-founder. All at the same table. Interesting, because when we look at an event that happened in Seattle not too long ago, a lot of these same names show up. So you got Marshall Smith, you got Michael Schellenberger, you've got Tom Wolfe, all there again, kind of trying to find real solutions for homelessness and addiction. This is really just a way to increase carceral approaches to these problems. They are not looking to solve them by any stretch of the imagination. And I wanted to highlight these two folks that I've got listed at the bottom. So Angelo Isidoro, he's BC Proud, AKA the Pacific Prosperity Network, backed by Chip Wilson, really just the mouthpiece for that organization. And Giuseppe Ganci, who's, again, I mentioned him before, he's Last Door Recovery and the chair at the Recovery Capital Conference of Canada. So this is important because, again, Press Progress, this is Stephen Maguziak here, digging into who Take Back Alberta really is. So this is the organization that's been really effectively taking over the UCP from within. They're responsible for putting Danielle Smith into power. And they have an identical website to Pacific Prosperity Network, right down to the little icons that they used along the left sidebar there. The who we are descriptions. It's really fascinating. And it doesn't end there either. They also happen to list the website, list Pacific Prosperity Network as its point of contact on their website. So oops, email info@pacificprosperity.ca. So that's who Take Back Alberta is. It's kind of like that moment where we realized that Soylent Green is people. So the Alberta government is at the center of a cross-border effort to demonize harm reduction, reinforce carceral powers in drug prohibition, and through these maintain racialized class structures in our economy. Its primary vehicles for doing this are abstinence-based recovery and policing. I want to talk just for a second about the recent budget that came out. So we've got, this is 2023-24. This is where they really had that mask off moment. They're showing us that they intend to make mental health and addiction recovery a central component of corrections and community policing. And again, there's an announcement out this week by Ministers Milliken and Ellis, reinforcing a lot of this language around forcing people in custody into addiction treatment. Okay, so this is like, the funny thing about all this is that the Calgary Police Service actually gave us the answer in one of their town halls that I went to in the fall. They had a whole bunch of businesses in talking to the businesses about how they needed to like ramp up their CCTV, and they needed to provide police more access into their shops, and put thicker glass on their storefronts and all this other stuff. But then at the same time, they told us that 90% of property crime in this city is committed by about 100 active individuals, and so they dubbed these people prolific offenders. They also told us that these folks largely engage in property crime to satisfy their drug habits. It's just so ridiculous that we have these crime prevention departments, dozens of people in the Calgary Police and other police forces working on crime prevention, but they never mention safe supply as a potential option for reducing crime and preventing crime. It's a lot of doublespeak going on within our police services, while at the same time, they're telling us that they cannot be trusted with mental health or addictions treatment or care, even for their own officers. I'd encourage you to check out this, A Thin Blue Line Between Spiritual Support and Indoctrination, also on my Substack. And it really just summarizes and adds on a little bit to a lot of the work done by a guy named Charles Rusnell, really, really important journalist here in Alberta, who has dug up some very scary information about what's going on over at CPS. Okay, so just kind of putting this together into a model, if we look back 10, 12 years when most of the deaths that were happening were attributed to pharmaceutical opioid deaths, this is questionable, honestly, given what we know about how fentanyl deaths were classified back then. But let's take it at face value. And we knew that pretty much all deaths were happening as a result of pharmaceuticals, at least at that point. At that point, the policy measures that we had in place were they weren't great, but they were still prohibition based. They were still sort of abstinence focused, but at least there was some leeway given to people who weren't falling into into that one size fits all abstinence approach. Since then, we've seen the hand kind of dip deeper into the water. People are drowning more and more really in this kind of imagery. And we've dropped the ladder a little bit more, just a little bit, through the NDP's period where they were opening overdose prevention sites. They were, expanding safe supply through the injectable opioid agonist treatment program, IOT. And really since then, since the UCP took power, people have sunk to the bottom of the pool now, and the ladder's been ripped up. So we're really not offering those options to people anymore. We're in fact, we're restricting those options as the years go by. At the same time, and this is a graph at the bottom, presented by Dina Hinshaw to the Alberta Safe Supply Committee, the UCP Safe Supply Committee last year, really showing us that as prescribing has gone down since 2017, that's the dotted line, the drug poison crisis has actually exploded through that period even more than it already was. So prescribing is not at the root of this issue. That's an inverse relationship. The distance between the politics and required measures can really kind of be seen by this imagery. And I think I'm just going to steal something that Dr. Dong said yesterday, where she told us that the window, in her opinion, is closing on supply regulation. She doesn't think she doesn't have a pharmaceutical that she can prescribe that competes with carfentanil now. So yeah, that kind of meme where somebody's reaching out a hand and then gives you a high five. So what can you do? I think, start by staying informed, watch, listen to Crackdown, pay attention to what's going on here in Alberta, get to know the different players. This is a political battle. So there's people involved. Keep organizing. You've got people in your group like Evan Watson, who has all this organizing, experience, with Camp Pekawewin and so on. That is an amazing network of people that you can tap into that really have that knowledge on the ground of what needs to be done to protect the community. So keep doing that. Keep doing what you're doing here today. Show up, like the students that were there, the med students that were there that day when the cop assaulted that person by the Walter Dale Theater a few weeks back. The fact that you were there meant a huge difference. There's all these eyewitnesses now as a result that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So showing up matters a lot. And call in when you notice like one of your friends, one of your colleagues in your program talking about how they're like looking forward to the day when they can go start a tech company and make a huge bunch of money off their med school training. Like, try and call them in and convince them to take another path forward. There's so many people profiteering off of this with these med school credentials right now in this world of addiction treatment and so on. And then finally, be loud. Keep doing what you're doing. These news stories do make a big difference. They're changing the conversation. So thanks for doing that, all of you, all of the organizers, all the people that have spoken to media. You're doing a really good job. So keep it up. If you want to keep in touch, I think best place is just to follow my Substack. There's a recent one I put out with Petra Schultz, who spoke yesterday, really about Polyev and the way he's talking. And one of the changes I think that needs to be made is really at the medical level. I had a doctor recently telling me that the most dangerous thing we do in emergency rooms is forcing people into withdrawal. They just pull out their IVs and walk. If the deaths that follow aren't manslaughter, there's certainly negligence. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll turn it over to Kate. Thanks so much.